Hello, everyone. Welcome to the opening session of this year's International Safety at Sea Week. My name is Fiona Lowe, and I'll be your host for the next 3 days. The International Safety at Sea Week is an annual event organized by the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore as part of its commitment to promote safety at sea. This year's edition features two MPA flagship conferences, the International Safety at Sea Conference, as well as the International Chemical and Oil Pollution Conference. We are heartened to have over 800 participants from more than 60 countries joining us, with key decision makers from governments around the world, as well as representatives from across different sectors of the maritime industry. Thank you all for joining us. To open today's session, we are pleased to have Mr. Chee Hong Tat, Senior Minister of State for Transport, Singapore, to address us. Minister, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm happy to join you to launch the International Safety at Sea Week 2021. The sea connects Singapore to people, places, and possibilities. Singapore has thrived as a maritime nation with our strategic location and natural harbour. The Straits of Malacca and Singapore are a major artery of world trade, which carries 1/3 of global container trade and 1/4 of global oil trade. As a major international hub port, Singapore takes maritime safety seriously. The number of major safety incidents per 100,000 vessel movements within Singapore territorial waters has fallen over the years, from 1.6 in 2011 to 0 in 2020. However, we must not rest on our laurels, and we must continue to be prepared and disciplined in protecting the safety of our seafarers, our ships, and our sea routes to ensure that our global supply lines remain open and secure. I'll therefore like to address 3 aspects of maritime safety today. First, protecting the physical health and mental wellness of seafarers. Next, improving safety on board ships. And finally, combating piracy and sea robberies. Let me start with seafarers. Seafarers are the backbone of the sea transport industry. It is estimated that there are about 1.65 million seafarers worldwide. The COVID-19 pandemic resulted in border closures and travel restrictions, and this has made it difficult for sea crew to be replaced. Many have had to work longer hours on board ships, often beyond their contracts. This is unsustainable, as fatigue and mental health issues can affect the ability of seafarers to operate safely. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020, Singapore has facilitated international crew change for more than 160,000 ship crew from more than 8,800 ships. More than 99% of foreign seafarers on board ocean-going vessels, regardless of flag. Maritime Singapore, led by the Singapore Shipping Association, has also audited 27 crew-safe facilities in upstream countries including the Philippines, Indonesia, India, and Malaysia. These facilities adopt a comprehensive and tight isolation regime before sign-on crew arrive in Singapore to embark their vessels. The Port of Singapore will continue to do our part to facilitate crew change under stringent protocols. With the advent of COVID-19 vaccines offering significant protection against the virus, 89% of the 7,500 resident seafarers working in Singapore port waters have received at least 1 dose of the vaccine, and 82% have been fully vaccinated. As a global hub port and international maritime centre, Singapore will also support the global vaccination drive for seafarers. This will add an additional layer of protection for them against the virus and enhance supply chain resilience. As I said in my earlier speech at the International Chamber of Shipping Forum, this is the right thing to do, and we will do it right. I'm pleased to announce that from 30th August 2021, we are starting our CVAX program to facilitate vaccination access for eligible non-resident foreign seafarers who are either working in the Port of Singapore for a prolonged duration, engaged in the supply of essential goods, or engaged in ferrying passengers. They include home-ported cruise ship crew, regional ferry crew, crew of vessels under major repair at our shipyards, as well as crew of supply vessels. Such seafarers may interact with our local community in the course of their work, so protecting them through vaccinations is part of our national effort to become a COVID-19 resilient nation. We are also facilitating the efforts of the Singapore Shipping Association, Maritime Unions, and PSA to allow ocean-going sign-on foreign seafarers to receive vaccinations as part of the established crew sign-on process in Singapore. These seafarers will undergo strict pre-arrival isolation and testing, and strict bubble wrap protocol when they are in Singapore. We will commence this once the arrangements are ready and the necessary approvals have been obtained. With this initiative, Singapore will join the network of ports around the world that are offering such vaccinations to international seafarers, including in Europe and the USA. Next, improving safety on board ships. We will continue to leverage technology to deal with new challenges on the horizon. One area Maritime Singapore is focusing on is sustainable fuels of the future, such as liquefied natural gas or LNG. With the increasing adoption of these fuels, fire safety is a perennial concern. Our seafarers must be equipped to handle emergency scenarios such as leakages and fires during bunkering operations. The Centre of Excellence in Maritime Safety, together with the Singapore Maritime Academy, has started the Maritime Immersive Learning Lab in Singapore Polytechnic. The lab has virtual reality-based tools which provide immersive and realistic shipboard scenarios to complement classroom-based training for trainees. By measuring trainees' reaction times, situational awareness, and decision-making, the tool also enables accurate assessment of their competency and can identify specific areas for improvement. This technology allows us to train our seafarers in a safer and smarter way to be ready for the safety challenges of the future. At the same time, we must also be prepared for major incidents. In global shipping, we have had a few of such incidents recently due to fire, such as Express Pearl and MSC Messina, and grounding, as in the case of Ever Given. It is important that stakeholders are well prepared for such incidents to enable effective response and recovery operations. In the case of Express Pearl incident in May this year, the maritime authorities of Sri Lanka and Singapore, as well as the ship operator, Express Feeders, worked closely together to manage the incident. Thankfully, the swift actions of the Sri Lankan authorities ensured all crew members were safely evacuated. The authorities also acted quickly to mitigate environmental impact. Technical experts and oil spill response equipment from Singapore were flown in to complement the efforts and resources at scene. Currently, efforts are underway to remove the wreck and clean up the beaches. Investigations into the cause of the fire are in progress. We must draw lessons from this incident and collectively strengthen our response capabilities and take preventive actions to avoid a similar incident from happening in the future. Lastly, combating piracy and sea robberies. This is an age-old threat to safe navigation, not just in this part of the world, but around the world. The Regional Cooperation Agreement on Combating Piracy and Armed Robbery Against Ships in Asia, or RECAP, is the first regional government-to-government initiative to counter piracy and sea robberies in Asia. The overall piracy and sea robbery situation in Asia has improved since RECAP's establishment. From an average of 225 incidents a year in the period prior to RECAP's establishment in 2006, the number has fallen to 125 a year between 2007 to 2020. In the first half of 2021, 37 incidents of armed robbery against ships were reported in Asia, a 35% decrease compared to the 57 incidents reported during the same period in 2020. Nonetheless, continued occurrence of incidents on board ships underway in the Singapore Strait remains a concern, with 20 incidents in the first half of this year as compared to 16 in 2020. All these 20 incidents occurred outside of Singapore waters, so they need to be tackled through joint enforcement actions with our neighbours. Singapore remains committed to playing an active part in RECAP to strengthen its role and effectiveness in ensuring safe navigation. This has been a milestone year for RECAP. The RECAP Information Sharing Centre, which Singapore has hosted since its inception, celebrated its 15th anniversary this year. The centre will continue to encourage all stakeholders to stay vigilant and make timely reports of incidents and enable coastal states to respond quickly to ensure maritime safety. We are also pleased that Germany has joined RECAP this year as a 21st contracting party. We look forward to welcoming more partners, such as France and Greece, who are working towards joining RECAP. This is testament to the centre's effectiveness and its importance to combat piracy and sea robberies in the region. As a world-leading port and a member of the global maritime community, maritime safety remains a top priority for Maritime Singapore. Safety is a shared responsibility for all stakeholders, including governments, industry players, and workers. Let's continue to encourage collaboration and further strengthen our collective commitment to build a safer maritime industry. I wish you many fruitful discussions over the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I would now like to invite Mr. Steen Lund, Chief Executive Officer of RightShip, to deliver the keynote presentation for the International Safety at Sea conference. Please join me to welcome Mr. Steen Lund.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever in the world you are dialing in from. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak about the intersection between humans and technology, and I will do that as a representative of RightShip, but hopefully also be able to touch on, and later on in our panel discussion, discuss robustly and vigorously how we can improve. Big thank you from the outset to MPA for continuously facilitating these International Safety at Sea weeks. They have incredible value to all of us across the supply chain, and I'm very excited to be part of it today. Allow me to just set the stage for those of you who are not aware what we do at RightShip, to spend a couple of slides explaining who we are and what we do. Our primary purpose that drives us is working towards a maritime industry that causes zero harm. And by zero harm, we mean zero harm from a safety point of view, where our primary product and orientation is towards vetting vessels, inspecting vessels, towards environmental sustainability, where again our primary product is built around insights into the sustainability of the vessels via GHG rating, where we have an A to G standard score, and then increasingly so our social responsibility executed via the focus we have on the well-being of seafarers. And I'll speak over all these three aspects, but primarily on the seafarer and safety today. Our history is rooted in a very negative series of events that took place in the late 80s and early 90s off the western coast of Australia. 6 primary bulk carriers went down, took about 100 seafarers down with them. So not exactly a happy beginning to a presentation, but safety is serious. Two of our three shareholders, BHP and Rio Tinto, being significant charterers of tonnage, simply concluded at that point they didn't have the decision-making tools available to make proper chartering decisions, and established at that point RightShip at arm's length as a standalone company. 6 years into that journey, Cargill joined, and the three of them constitute now equal shareholders. They are also, as are well over 100 major charterers, part of our customer base, and obviously in that sense they keep us to the task, and hence have those two roles. Somewhat into that journey, we then in 2009 established the standard for GHG rating, where when a vessel is being released from a shipyard as a new build, we obtain all the relevant data about the design of that vessel and perform a GHG rating, and that is then hosted on our digital platform. And over the years, we have then grown into successive use of different platform tools, different digital platform tools, which on February 8th of this year resulted in the launch of the current safety score and platform that's available. So our foundation for existence is the accumulation of copious amounts of data about the vessels from a yard gives birth to the vessel, through the operation where we ingest AIS data, data from class societies, data from port state control, incident data reported directly from the vessel in operation, and many, many other aspects that then accumulates into a holistic overview of the safety of the vessel that we then apply in a score up to a maximum score of 5, which is obviously what the industry desires, that then provides transparency to the users. The products themselves, the platform hosts 57,000 vessels with all the data that an IHS and similar providers have available. We are 40,000 times a year asked by a prospective charterer to vet a vessel, where essentially we use the data that the platform consumes to provide an insight into the safety of that vessel relative to the journey that the charterer wishes to undertake. We go on board vessels about 2,500 times a year to validate the state of affairs via approximately 2-day inspections. The users of the platform itself, about 3.8 million times a year, go in and look at a specific asset to understand how that asset performs, and uses that as an early due diligence process. And we perform about 30,000 greenhouse gas ratings of vessels. Why are we here? Essentially because there is still a lot that doesn't work out there. And looking at the data we can accumulate, we are still in an industry that unfortunately registers well over 50 fatalities per year, and a significant number of seafarers that go missing. So although we have registered a reduction in the number of accidents and incidents on vessels and involving vessels, we still see an absolutely unacceptably high fatality rate, and obviously this is what we encourage the community we work in to come together around finding solutions to via the RightShip platform. Shifting focus a little bit to what also Senior Minister talked about, crew change. There's still a lot of work to do, and it's incredibly encouraging to register that again Singapore is setting the stage, being a front runner on vaccine. We look very much forward to hearing more about that. A lot can be done still, and I want to share with you a really negative incident that we registered on a vessel that was prior vetted by RightShip, was on its ballast voyage to start the voyage that we had vetted it for. Took place 3 weeks or so ago. And As part of the vetting process, we had identified that there were seafarers on board who had been there for a relatively long period of time and were close to coming up to the period where a crew change would be required. The ship owner booked a crew change in the state of the nation that the vessel was going into call, and shortly before the vessel call, that state decided to protect its land-based citizens as a priority and disallow any level of crew change with a very short-term notice. The vessel owner decided to do an at-sea crew change with a crew boat, and unfortunately, this particular seafarer fell in the water between the crew boat, was crushed, and perished. An example where one level of risk is introduced into the supply chain, which technically was unnecessary. The seafarer had been on board at that point for 10 months, was certified COVID-free, so certainly there wouldn't have been a risk in introducing him to do a crew change via land. And certainly an area that we need more debate about, how we satisfy both ministries of transport, ministries of health, and then the requirements of making crew change. We are of the belief that good use of technology that can validate the state of the seafarer, possibly also overlay that with mental health data to augment where that's required, that a crew change is relevant, is available to all of us to use today and can get us away from these types of situations. So essentially, the intersection that we see and that we work with in RightShip is around the areas of transparency of the safety of the vessel by using the data available to all of us to vet the vessel, going on board, augmenting the inspections that port state, class societies, and others in the ecosystem perform to validate the physical safety of the vessel, to speak with the crew, very importantly, as a part of a validation that they are well and healthy. And largely the safety score that we then offer to the marketplace, that on one hand, charterers can use to determine their chartering decisions on, and owners and operators and managers, very importantly, can use in what is obviously a beauty contest in many ways, if you like. When you wish to charter out your vessel, you have the possibility to aspire to have the highest possible safety score, and through that profile your ability to focus on safety. That transparency is available via all these data points that I mentioned. A new product that we will be launching soon and that I hope to have continued significant industry dialogue around is a product focusing on crew welfare. We have been working with the Sustainable Shipping Initiative in London and recently with 8 very good global ship managers and ship owners to structure what will be a code of conduct that both charterers and owners, managers can sign up to define what good care looks like for the crew, what good well-being that you should aspire to make available for the crew looks like, and then in a self-assessment, assess the DOC holder's ability to meet those code of conduct requirements. We will host the outcome of that on the RightShip platform, so that next to the safety score, next to the GHG rating, there will be an ability for the DOC holder to see his own and portray his own standard when it comes to care for the crew. We're very, very grateful for all the good collaboration that has taken place so far with the industry, and look forward to building on that as we launch the product. We are also working hard together with Intercargo on finally getting what has been a long-drawn and very ambitious project of launching dry BMS, working somewhat on the same principles of a self-assessment that the crew well-being score intends to deliver, where down the verticals of performance, people, plant, and processes, a DOC holder has the possibility to self-assess and aspire to either be with a safety focus that is basic, intermediate, advanced, or excellent. And again, that is an honest self-assessment done by a DOC holder, where then various companies will have the possibility to offer a validation service of that self-assessment. As you can see on the slide here, some 13,000 downloads of the product has already taken place. And we hope to find a really good home for the dry BMS, where the intention is that Intercargo and RightShip, as IP holders of the standard, wishes to hand that standard over to an NGO that can then be the host and take it on from here. Again, look very much forward to seeing that finally getting into the market and supporting the industry. Quickly on areas of opportunity, it'll probably be more a summary than going into specifics on each of these 5 items. But the quest that we are on, and that we see many of our partners in the industry is on aggregating more data, aggregating better data, so that we can deploy that data into proper data science, use proper algorithms for which we need copious amounts of data to, for instance, drive more studies around the human element, moving the focus from an outcome of an event to a coaching of a seafarer at the point where a learning opportunity can be created and a negative outcome can be avoided by having the right competence in the right situation. We see that the use of technology, and we see that partnerships around the deployment of technology is absolutely essential in that journey. Excuse me. And to just close off with real technology, a quick little look at the possibility of deploying artificial intelligence and machine learning. Then on the platform that we are operating today, we are in the process of making much greater use of artificial learning to essentially flesh out the key points that the data has already shown about a specific voyage, or has already shown about a specific asset, or has already shown about a specific DOC holder, so that all of that is available at the point when a VET is performed, and can help the superintendent executing the VET to have all the data points to conclude from, hence reducing the time it takes to perform that validation, and allowing the charterer to make quick decisions at a point where markets are warm and you would wish those decisions to be made. Lastly, we're also deploying machine learning onto the platform to essentially augment all the data insights that we make every day on the vessels, so that can help us in interpreting specific events that have taken place and play that back as learning opportunities to the industry. So if, for instance, we see that we have a higher prevalence of accidents related to people wearing belts instead of harnesses, then we use machine learning to tell us that and play it back to our users, our subscribers, with the aim to reduce incidents or accidents related to those. With those words, I thank you again for having the opportunity to talk about safety and to talk about the intersections between the use of safety and humans' safety on board vessels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lund. May I invite Mr. Carsten Ostenfeld, Intertanker Council Member and Chief Operating Officer, Anglo-Eastern Ship Management Limited, to deliver the keynote presentation for the International Chemical and Oil Pollution Conference. Mr. Ostenfeld, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. So, Mr. Sten Lund, thanks for the very encouraging words. Mr. Senior Minister, I'm very happy to hear what was portrayed and what was explained. So, ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for allowing me to deliver this keynote speech at this very esteemed conference. I would like to thank the organizers and my fellow speakers and panel participants for their support. I think it's been a truly great experience to prepare for this conference. And I would say I wouldn't have expected anything less from MPA. So I'm very happy to be here. I do hope that this conference and the coming days will inspire our industry stakeholders with views on pressing matters and hopefully also with solutions. I would say that we have enough to deal with so far. As you all have learned over the last years, we do have several mega trends which is impacting our future. But one thing which has never changed is the wish to leave nothing behind than the wake. We want to conduct our business in a safe and a proper manner, and our aim and target is absolutely zero pollution. Unfortunately, most of what we deal with comes together to achieve this goal. And this means that we eventually end up having a pretty complex discussion about how to come to zero pollution. In the discussion about pollution avoidance, we will also be impacted by the future fuels we use, the associated technology, the people we have on board, or the lack of same, the position of national states and how they deal with unrest, pandemics, and other major incidents, new consumer behaviors. We have seen and learned a lot over the last 2 years about this. There will be consequential trade patterns which will develop. And we will see something happening as a consequence of digitalization and of course connectivity across borders. All this will play a part of the future landscape we have to tackle in the shipping industry, and it will shape our response to safety matters, hereunder pollution. Today, I will mainly speak on behalf of the tanker industry in my capacity as a council member in Intertanko. But I would like to stress that any discussion goes for all segments. Container ships, bulk carriers, offshore vessels. We are all part of the same discussion and problems. If we start with one known commodity and a potential polluter, we can safely say that the world will be dependent on fossil fuel for a while. Fossil fuels will remain a significant factor in the global energy mix, and with oil as an example, anticipated to represent more than 20% of the European energy sector's demand after 2040. It is therefore vital that the means for securing the supply of this energy during the global transition to zero net emissions remains as environmentally sustainable as possible. To achieve this, the tanker sector must be viewed as a partner in delivering this objective and therefore actively engaged during the transitional period. The tanker industry and their peers in other segments are actively implementing climate mitigation technologies on their vessels already today. Research and development into, as well as actual deployment and implementation of sustainable and environmentally efficient technologies is ongoing on vessels currently in operation, but as well as new buildings being ordered for the use of a longer term. The transition and implementation of new and environmentally efficient technologies continues as part of the industry's sustainable economic path and is often ahead of the development and adoption of international environmental regulations in the shipping industry. We believe the current regulatory developments are intended to facilitate sustainable investments towards clear environmental goals. But we are, however, the shifting ambition and political maneuvering often associated with climate change debate may exclude a significant and forward-looking sector from actually committing to long-term investments when seeking to install sustainable and efficient technologies on the vessels. And certainly, this will be the case without a clear consideration given to early movers. Examples are common where owners are working with banks to secure finance and enable the use of new environmental friendly technology on existing vessels and to order new vessels with advanced technology for the future. But to be truly sustainable from the outset, and with the understanding of a life cycle of tanker tonnage and any tonnage, investments must continue during the transitional period to secure emission reduction pathway for the entire economic life of a vessel. So notwithstanding the climate and the greenhouse gas related initiatives being implemented by the tanker industry and the shipping industry, then wider industry standards are forced through various organizations, including Intertanko, by the pooling of knowledge and experience on all environmental parameters affected by the operation of the global fleet. A significant portion of the maritime industrial established best management practice and operational standards are conceived through the guidance produced by organizations like Intertanko. All this comes from members. It ranges from waste management to vessel performance optimization, and from minimizing the transfer of invasive aquatic species through hull biofouling, as you know well as the early implementation of global and regional ship recycling initiatives. We also know the ongoing implementation of EEXI and carbon intensive index also add pressure to the industry, and it will in due course impact shipping commercially as well as the safety of derated vessels, although we would believe that we within the existing framework are able to achieve sufficient power. Now, largely overlooked within the current regulatory space is a rapidly growing investment into environment, social, and governance strategies, with the tanker industry as an example. As a leading sector in global shipping, the tanker sector is delivering on ambitious objectives established by ESG policies go well beyond the criteria offered in the draft Delegated Act. Using globally recognized accounting, financial, and auditing system for ESG and sustainability, such as those offered by the Sustainability Accounting Standards, the Global Reporting Initiative, the Responsible Ship Recycling Standards, and the Carbon Disclosure Project, the tanker industry offers not only technological pathway for improved environmental performance, but an economic one where the entire maritime sector can follow. It is not uncommon for leading tanker owners to attain an A and B in the CDP ratings, which clearly demonstrate the tanker sector's trend in aligning corporate sustainable policy objectives with tangible, measurable improvements in environmental performance. A number of industry-led shipping environmental initiatives, and here we are talking about the Poseidon Principles and the Responsible Recycling Standards, may be seen as a way in which non-regulatory initiatives may force the way which the industry tackles the environmental issues in the future. Leading financial and chartering entities have led initiatives promoting investments into environmental sustainable shipping, such as initiatives draw heavily and rely on the engagement of the whole sector. The above reference initiatives include the likes of the Sea Cargo Charter, which offers a useful example of a strategy used by international charters when seeking assets operated by responsible shipping companies, focusing on how the assets will achieve decarbonization objectives. So whereas we all understand there will be new alternatives to fuel vessels for the future, bearing in mind the shipping industry in total emit 3% of greenhouse gases, and accepting the need to decarbonize, we also have to be clear that the picture is still blurred for many industry players to decide on their path for the future. It all comes with alternatives, and it taps into national strategies also. How would the future fuel be produced? Which national states will develop sustainable legislation around energy provision, from where on the industry in large can invest into new use of fuel powered by green energy, and subsequently invest into vessels to bring the necessities of the world around. By doing so, shipping will still be the only way to connect trade and support the prosperity of the world, also among countries in dire need. This will never be for the industry alone, and a very solid and strong backup from national states are required, and true leadership expected. Another mega trend is digitalization. And as Steen was pointing at, this is rapid developing. The coverage of satellites will in the next few years change the landscape we are in with regards to online connectivity of our trading vessels. We have seen a rapid development over the recent years, but the speed will without any doubt increase. This will open for a new area of optimization, from optimization across supply chains to optimization on board individual vessels. We already see a lot of positive developments, but both legacy in our industry, in some cases contractual requirements, and technological constraints keep us away from unlocking the full potential. My personal belief is that the stakeholders across the various supply chains, be it tankers or dry vessel, will engage differently for the future, and we will see pockets of improvements slowly growing into a more industry-wide implementation, which eventually will benefit us all with less pollution, more efficiency, and reduced cost. Now, all the above leads to one very important topic, and that was nicely addressed by the two former speakers, namely the people we have on board, the people who have chosen to spend their life and career in shipping. Our seafarers who spend more time on board vessels than at home, who continue to serve and deliver a safe means of distribution of goods and wealth, I would say, across the world. These people are key in reducing and controlling potential pollution. If they do not manage to optimize on board, to communicate with terminals and charters about new routes and delays in the supply chain, we will never get there. The key to success is people. And so far, we have learned within the last 1.5 to 2 years that very few national states actually recognize the importance to the extent it seems that they are totally forgotten. And honestly, I think it is a disgrace to us all. It cannot be we sit in our polished office around the world and talk about the big ticket items of reducing our greenhouse gas footprint and all the other measures we want to do to ensure safe transportation. And then we are not able to relieve people on time due to lockdowns in various countries. This will not support safety and pollution avoidance. This simple concept, in the broad scheme of things, of globally announce a seafarer as a key worker should be possible without any hesitation and without losing control of the ongoing pandemic. The associated risk is very overseeable with relatively few people traveling across borders. If we cannot manage this very simple task, relatively simple task, we will not in any way support our far bigger agenda, be it pollution avoidance in the sea, reduction of emissions, optimization of supply chains, or anything else. So may I end my keynote speech today by encouraging all honorable participants to this conference to send the messages again on this matter to all your contacts, and let us together build a sustainable and pollution-free future. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ostenfeld and Mr. Lund, for setting the stage for our panel discussion next on this year's theme, the Human and Technology Crossroads for Maritime Safety. Our moderator is Captain Yves van der Bon, Honorary President, the Nautical Institute, Singapore branch. Captain Yves is also the Director of Loss Prevention at the Standard Club. Let's say hi to Captain Yves. And joining him on the panel, we have our keynote speakers, Mr. Steen Lund, Chief Executive Officer of RightShip, Mr. Carsten Ostenfeld, Intertanko Council Member and Chief Operating Officer, Anglo-Eastern Ship Management Limited, as well as Mr. Nick Chubb, Managing Director of TTS, and Dr. Oivind Hallen, Vice President, Research at Syntef Ocean. Ladies and gentlemen, as we move into the panel discussion now, please note that you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to pose questions to our panelists. And for our audience on site, if you have any questions for our panelists, please raise up your hands and we'll pass you a microphone. And with that, I'll hand the time over to our panel moderator. Captain Yves, please.
Thank you so much, Fiona. and good afternoon, good morning again to everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this opening session of the International Safety at Sea Week. And very much thank you to MPA and ICOPSI to organize this conference. I would like to thank Steen and Karsten for setting the stage during their opening address. I thought those were really interesting points that were raised that I'm sure that we are going to discuss during this panel session. We have prepared a number of topics for you that we will be going through in the next 1 hour. I will try and answer as many of your questions as we can, so please do let them come in, as Fiona mentioned. Now, it was mentioned during the opening address that it's quite imperative for the various maritime industry sectors to work together towards a more sustainable future for the industry. Technology is certainly one of the main enablers of a more green shipping. But we need to remain vigilant that we, and with that actually I mean our seafarers, can keep up with technology and vice versa as well. We need to guard against the implementation of new technology, or regulations for that matter, if it would adversely affect the safety of the ship. During this session, we will be discussing this crossroads and raise important considerations for the industry related to pollution, regulatory change, seafarer training, seafarer well-being, and smart data analytics. Now, during the registration process, we asked you all a question: in which areas you would like to see an improvement of technology in order to support the maritime safety? And looking at the results of this poll that you can see now, I'm not particularly surprised that there is a more or less even spread between the various options. That's more or less what we would expect. But I am happy to see that the majority of you, or at least a small majority of you, did choose for crew training to be the more important sector that we need to focus on. And that's something that we are definitely going to discuss further during this session. Now, if we turn to our first topic, and how technology can assist in reducing our carbon footprint and preventing pollution from ships. Not just pollution to the sea, but also pollution to the air. We are aware that a lot of research is required in order for ship operators to be able to meet upcoming regulatory requirements. But there are also concerns in the industry on how the human element can actually keep up with these requirements. And I would like to turn to Nick first for your thoughts on how, on the investment in technology that there is, which areas should we be focusing on?
Thank you, Yves. And for context, we monitor emerging technology trends in the maritime industry. And I would say when it comes to decarbonisation as a sort of first point to look at here, I'd say the good news is that it's sort of day zero for everyone. There's sort of no clear leaders in the field of zero emission shipping, and it's an enormous opportunity for investors and for the industry. But building on what you were saying there, while it's going to be leaders ashore who actually make the decisions about what the future of zero carbon shipping looks like, it will be seafarers who are actually on the ship who are going to act as the interface between the industry and decarbonisation, pollution, and all of that. So I like to sort of think of the decarbonisation issue in a framework of three areas that will require investment. The first is using technology to create immediate operational efficiencies that can reduce emissions. So depending on the research you read, anywhere from sort of 10% to 30% of ton-mile emissions can be eliminated through improvements to operational efficiencies. There's lots of solutions available that exist today. They're quite fast to implement and they have quite a short payback time. But 9 times out of 10, really these come back to behavioral change. And there's a couple of examples that have come out recently where anything from sort of 25 to 50% reduction in fuel consumption has come about through enabling behavioral change in terms of how the vessel is maneuvered. And this really is a human element problem. This is an area where you need to invest. Yes, is in technology, but principally actually it's in the people who are controlling the sticks. The second area is the kind of research that's going to be required to create and then test the fuels of the future. And that's now starting to pay off. We heard obviously last week that Maersk is already ordering vessels that are capable of running on carbon neutral fuels as well as traditional fossil fuels. But again, when you consider the safety of future fuels, those who are at the sharp end of it is the seafarers. It's again comes back to, yes, there is a large amount of research required to understand how we can create fuels in a carbon neutral way, but ensuring the safety of those fuels comes back down to the seafarers, and we need to be sure we're investing in the individuals who are at the front line of that. The third area in that framework, I think, is the kind of development that's going to be required to build the infrastructure for future fuels. So it's one thing that to have vessels that can run on a carbon neutral fuel. It's quite another to have that fuel available anywhere that ships will go in the world. And that's a big potential problem. And again, the safety of that supply chain comes back to the operators on the ground. This is more landside, so it won't necessarily be seafarers, but there's a huge amount of investment required in the human element side. And obviously, we've talked a bit about human element and sort of whether we're doing enough as an industry to keep up with these new requirements. As an industry, we talk about safety and human element being a top priority, but unfortunately, the numbers betray a reality where we actually underinvest, in supporting our crews. We did some research last year for Inmarsat to try and understand investment patterns and also purchasing patterns for human element and safety-related technologies. So from a 10-year period, from 2010 to 2020, startups with a focus on human factors, crew management, well-being, welfare, and seafarer safety, on average attract 4 times less investment than startups focused on vessel machinery performance, so things like engine efficiency, hull monitoring, and hydrodynamic performance. With that as well, businesses that were focused on safety and human performance grow an average 25% slower than businesses focused on vessel machinery and performance. So yes, there's this narrative we have about the fact that we safety is our top priority and that we invest as an industry in the human element. But unfortunately, the reality is that it's not true. The investment is as much as 4 times less. So when we look to the future, it's crucial, obviously, to understand that we absolutely must invest in decarbonisation and other technologies that will improve the industry's environmental footprint. We also must invest in supporting the safety, well-being and performance of people that work on our ships. I think if we don't, our ability to be an environmentally conscious industry will be severely hampered.
Nick, that's really interesting. It's amazing to hear that there is 4 times the difference between more the efficiency kind of in research compared to the human side. That's really sobering. And Karsten, earlier on you talked about alternative fuels, and Nick already set out, there is quite a lot of options that are available to ship owners in order to try and comply with 2030 or 2050 requirements. It's not going to be as easy as I'm saying easy, it probably wasn't that easy, but back in 2020 when you had to choose between going low sulfur or going scrubber, the next choice is going to be a lot more difficult. How do you look at this? And from your perspective, how do you see technology help you with this?
Well, first of all, I would say I fully concur with Nick on his assessment, and I think that was also what I was trying to touch upon in my opening. You know, without the human element of all this, I think it'll be a huge challenge to get going. And it links nicely into my comment about alternative fuel. So we have done a study now from in our company to figure out what is actually coming for the future. What kind of technology do we have to master tomorrow when some owners have done their choice? And we provide the service as ship managers. And our conclusion was the training element and the mindset and the procedures behind it and everything which is required to run future fuels will be on a different level. We come from an industry where we, to some extent, in the good old days, could live with about and close to, and that was sufficient to keep running. But tomorrow we cannot. The equipment on these future technologies, sensor techniques, the feedback signal, the software which runs around this, I think that will require a totally different mindset and a totally different level of training. So to the discussion about which fuel do we think will come for in the long run, in my mind, it hangs a lot into what infrastructure will we see. As you said, Nick, now Maersk have made their bet into methanol. I don't think it's the last time they're going to bet, and I don't think it's the last time many other people will bet. But I think the development of infrastructure in the world will, to a wide extent, drive what kind of fuels is coming for the future.
Thank you, Karsten. Øyvind, if I can come to you, because from your research perspective, you are involved with new technology research, etc. And if I'm looking in particular at for example, the EEXI, CII regulations that are coming up, with these new technologies or new requirements that are being put in place on board of ships, is there a danger to the safety? Do they all work together nicely? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think you introduced my concern quite nicely there, because my concern is on the balance between the changes which are based on environmental perspective and the operability in critical situations. In a way, this becomes a balancing act between the everyday, in quotes, small emissions from shipping and this risk of major incidents. Today's fleet is based on a continuous technology development, continuous evolution of rules and regulations, but more fundamentally on many years of experience gained from practical operation. And from a political perspective, there's a strong focus now on removed or reduced emissions, often with financial support if you do, or financial penalties if you don't. But in the overall design process, this means that some KPIs will be focused more than others, and this holistic perspective may be suffering. I mean, one example with EDI is that, in effect, it's awarding optimization for performance in calm seas, and this gives reduced harsh weather performance. Other obvious ways to reduce emissions in daily operations, slow steaming has been mentioned. You can go down on engine size, but this means less effect, and equally important, less available torque on the propeller at slow speeds. Other measures, we can go down to a minimum rudder size, or remove or reduce the number of tunnel thrusters. Separately, such design changes may not be critical, but if it's taken too far, it will have some serious implications on safety and operability in critical situations. I would not say that the incident of Ever Given is an example in this respect, but the incident can be used to illustrate the dilemma that the industry must face. On one hand, reducing emissions, and on the other hand, maintaining safety, maneuverability, and operability of the fleet. So my perspective is that this is a huge balancing act, and the answer is not given by the by the industry ourselves.
Øyvind, thank you so much for that. We lost you there for a short while. But what I think one topic that has been touched on by all of the panelists so far is really the importance of the human part in there, and making sure that training is being done for the crew. And what I feel is important there is, on one hand, yes, okay, are we using technology in order to be able to properly train our crew? But on the other hand, is the crew being properly trained to use the new technology? And that is where my concern is. A simple example is the EGDIS installation, which has been on board of ships for so long now, But we are still, when we do accident investigations, are finding issue with the knowledge that the crew has about the limitations when using ACDIS. So there is something there that needs to be improved. Crew, of course, already has a lot of both mandatory and in addition to STCW training that is required to be done. But Steen, if we, from your perspective, how can we bring technology into this, and how can we improve then the training of the crew?
I'm certain that Carsten has better answers to that question than I have, but let me start with a few observations, also building on what Carsten said before, which essentially my first question to the question would be, who do we attract into the industry in the first place? And how do we then ensure that we overlay the basic competence that they bring into the industry with additional competence building? It's interesting to, first of all, live with the proposition that today we have pretty much a singular fuel, an uncomplicated product to handle. And there is no doubt that as we move forward, we won't see just a single future fuel. We'll see a mix of different fuels. So the starting point in terms of who do we attract into the industry and how do we train them has to actually be seen in light of how will the asset look in future. So I think it's a much more complex situation than just, are we optimizing the ACDIS and is the man operating the ACDIS really capable of doing that? I think we're looking at a far more complex vessel. I know we're not going to touch on autonomy and the whole concept of mass today, but again, this is coming to us. This is the light we have to frame how we plan competence building around, because there will be increasing elements of autonomy on the assets that our seafarers will initially be on, and perhaps over time less so. So there's a complexity there that we need to build into our training regimes that's not with us today. And I think it really starts with all the training facilitators, how we take ownership of what is taught to the seafarers at source, as opposed to just bringing them into our system and then starting the competence building from there. When you're then on board the vessel, I guess the way I would look at it would be, no technology should be introduced onto an asset unless it has significant positive repercussions to that asset. You shouldn't have technology there if it doesn't replace a tool that doesn't do as well as the new technology that comes in. And then we're back to the human element again, that there has to be a narrative where the seafarer has an incentive to truly operate that technology at her or his highest level of competence. So we need to tell a story about what's in it for the seafarer. And if there's nothing in it except a lot of extra work at that point where that individual operates the technology, then there has to be another element of the narrative taught to the seafarer that it has to be good for another purpose than reducing an exposure of the seafarer from a safety aspect, or reducing time spent on a task. And I think understanding that narrative has to be shared, so that there's an incentive where the seafarer truly understand what is my role in this and why is what I'm doing of value, is something we need to be preoccupied with as we understand, again, the deeper aspect of the human element. On the positive side, the advent of technology also democratizes teaching opportunities. Years back, we were used to having to bring the seafarers off the vessel and bringing them into crew conferences and physically having that learning space. That's not at all necessary any longer. We have AR and VR that is being built onto or into products, so that opportunities of learning on the vessel itself exist, or opportunities of learning next to a new technology being introduced exist. And I think that's extremely gratifying once we truly embrace that.
I would agree with you on that, Steen, and I think it is important that those new ways of teaching are actually being really spread out more to more training centers. At the moment, I agree with you, it is there, but it is not being used sufficiently, in my opinion. But like you say, Karsten, I'm sure is going to have an opinion about crew training. And I know, Karsten, that Anglo is using quite some innovative ways of training your crew. So would you want to elaborate on that?
I might even be able to offer a strong opinion if you want. So, no, but you're absolutely right. I think that the training over years, of course, has evolved, as Sten was also pointing at. And I think most today, are using simulators, have been using them for long. They are, of course, much, much better today than there was in the past. So this is one thing. The latest, relatively new, is, of course, virtual reality, which is touching on this generation of seafarers, which we are getting into our industry right now. For them, I think that's pretty normal. This is how we can pre-train them into working on a ship to figure out how things works. And then virtual reality is a very good tool. It can be spread very fast to many people. And the last thing what we have been doing is actually to developing a gaming app also, where we kind of again try to touch on this generation of seafarers, where they can learn more about ship techniques and how to act and engage on a ship through gaming, basically. It's all good and solid, but it has an element of gaming, which I think is exciting and of course a way to get in touch with the younger generation of seafarers. So the way we do it, I think, is on one side a little bit forward pointing, but it's also coming back to some basic skills with the fact that we actually have an academy where we train young people age 18. Where they simply get the basic seamanship. And then I would also point out one thing, and this is no matter what we do, coming on board a ship and actually being there, learning the whole package will still be there. So we can do a lot of training before people actually get on the ship. But the thing of getting out there, spelling the sea, feeling the wind, being with your colleagues, being part of the team, all this has to happen on board a ship. So no matter what we put on board, I think this element of training will still stay, in my view.
Yeah, definitely. The practical experience will always count for so much more. But it's interesting that the new AR or VR technologies, let's hope that they are able to give some kind of feel of what it is, and that the level of understanding by the seafarer is increased that way. Oivind, from your perspective, are we doing training correctly?
Yeah, well, there's there are many answers to that. To me, that question has many sides. On one hand, are we training the crew properly? On the other hand, are we designing systems that properly support the crew? And then are we sufficiently looking at the day-to-day work situation of the crew?
Oivind, are you still with us? He seems to have gone off again. Sorry for that. Nick, can we get your thoughts, perhaps on the crew training?
Absolutely. To make an attempt to answer the question you asked, Oivind, my very short answer would be no. I don't think we are doing crew training correctly, consistently across the entire industry. And I think if we were, the level of safety critical incidents that we see in the industry every year would be much lower. I think there's a huge amount that we could be doing to better embrace technologies that have been mentioned, for example, by Carsten, things like augmented and virtual reality and simulation. I think when you take simulation to its fullest extreme, it's possible to send astronauts into space for the first time with them being fully briefed, fully drilled. They know exactly what to do because it's been simulated so many times over a number of years. I'm not suggesting we should do that, and I fully agree with Carsten's point that you don't get the real understanding of what life at sea is like until you've got the wind in your hair and you're there with your crew on your ship. I wholeheartedly agree with that, but I think there is a huge amount more that we could do to drill those kind of safety critical scenarios on board vessels through simulation in a way that's safe, cheap, repeatable. That I think that has a massive potential to reduce the impact of safety critical incidents on board just by improving how people respond to them. I think that is tied into a whole range of issues related to STCW and the kind of lack of flexibility that sits within that, which is possibly a can of worms we don't want to open just now, but I think it's worth flagging that at a regulatory level, there's a lot of inflexibility when it comes to training.
Thank you, Nick. Carsten, can I come back to you for a second? Or we have Oyvind back again? Oyvind, sorry, do you want to...
Yeah, I think we had an example of insufficient training in technology. From our perspective, coming back to this training, what we see as important is that training is specific. What we've seen in several occasions for Norwegian offshore vessels and inland ferries is that in critical situations, humans act based on previous experience. So in a critical situation, many fall back on what they did to handle a similar situation on a previous vessel with a previous system. So the core of it all, what makes training so difficult is when a new system is introduced, how to transfer manuals and e-learning into true experience. And that's a very difficult challenge. And then there's a second aspect. What we learn from, that's part of the research findings, what we learn from are the small incidents and the near accidents that are avoided. It's not the major accidents that hit the headlines. It's the smaller incidents and the near accidents, and these should be recorded and used in experience sharing, but current practice is quite mixed in that respect. So our perspective is that familiarization is the real key. From our perspective, crew training need to be ship-specific, not using simulators for a generic class of ships, but simulators for the ship. And second most important, as also Nick touched upon, is to allow proper familiarization when new crews are taking over. So this is not something that actually is technology-driven or any rocket science at all. But it's so difficult to implement in practice. I guess the day-to-day financial constraints play a part in this. But moving from generic to specific and moving from, let's say, knowledge to experience, that's the key challenge to get crew to really function properly in critical situations.
Thank you, Oyvind. Carsten, sorry, I want to come back to you for a second because we received a question from our audience. We've been talking about human element now for so many years, but it's still every incident that we see, the human element is still there as an issue. Is there something that we can do with the use of AI or technology to get some meaningful compliance, as Captain Atul mentioned? What are your thoughts on this?
Actually, I was thinking we might be missing one side of this and this is more like what happens in the team, because when you analyze incidents when they have happened, I think there's often an element of the human interaction as part of it. It's not only about technology, it's not only about not knowing, it was also because the situation you were in. And my thoughts is always, we should kind of think the context our people are in, and then you should work on making them as successful as possible in that context. And I think sometimes we miss the context. If you add it all up, it's late. I think people have been awake for long. They have the pressure, perceived pressure. It doesn't even have to be a real pressure. It could just be a perceived pressure on board. There might be something about power distance, and so on. So I think it's much about this, getting it right across the team, which also will create improved safety and kind of better awareness. And I think also touch on all what Øyvind and Nick were saying about how do we train people, how do we ensure that they get the experience which is already on the ship. I think that can be provided by either the people who are already there, has been there longer than the ones who joins, or alternatively, of course, in a handover situation. But I think this about the team dynamic, I think, is very important in this discussion, and that might even be the thing which also creates a compliance. If you manage to get this culture going on board across ships.
Thanks, Karsten. Nick, if I can come back to you. And earlier on, it was mentioned by a few people, I think you included. There's so much training going on. There's so many things going on board. But what about the fatigue management of our crew on board? And of course, from your perspective, you are the fatigue expert, so to say. But I think this is an important topic on seafarer well-being. How do you see technology helping us with that aspect?
Thank you, Yves. Well, I'm certainly no expert myself, but at Thetis we've been fortunate enough to run a number of innovation programs related to fatigue in the last year or so. And perhaps to answer your question, it might be helpful to talk about some of those. So the first is a project that we've been running with Shell and Immersive, where over the last year, we've been trialing an intelligent fatigue management system. So it combines digital work and rest hours that are easy for the crew to fill out and use, and sort of automate a lot of the compliance process and headaches that come with that. That's combined with wearables that the crew wear on board that track fatigue and various sort of fatigue and health related markers. Over time, what that project has made it possible for us to do on a single vessel is to sort of create a kind of traffic light system for the crew overall. So that's able to kind of show senior leaders on board, and also the fleet management team ashore a sort of red, amber, green traffic light of how fatigued the crew is, to give them an early warning of when they may need to react to do things like crew changes. We've also been working in the last year with Lloyd's Register's Safety Tech Accelerator to take a fatigue risk management system to market. That uses a new type of cognitive monitoring technology. What it's able to do is just sort of by taking a quick video with your smartphone, it is able to recognize how cognitively fatigued you may be by tracking the human eye. And what we've found when we've been working on this is that systems like this allow ship and port operators to take much more of a risk-based approach to fatigue management. So it's actually unique to every individual, rather than simply sort of working to prescribed work and rest hours. And essentially what this enables is for an operator, wherever they are in the world, to be able to understand when or where or during what type of operations that fatigue risks are highest, and to be able to put mitigation measures in place at the right time, rather than just saying the crew are fatigued, because we know that the crew generally are fatigued because they're doing sort of 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operations. On that, one thing I would say is that I think the maritime industry is increasingly out of step with other safety critical industries. Aviation, rail, healthcare, nuclear, a whole host of other safety critical industries have moved over to this sort of new way of managing fatigue, where it's based on risk rather than prescriptive rules. And I think fully embracing that approach is not a technology question, it's a question of regulation. And I think it comes back to IMO, it comes back to flag states to look at how these approaches could improve safety, rather than just working within this very prescriptive framework that bluntly doesn't work. And I think tying that back to training, it does come back to sort of so many of the issues that we see in the industry stemming from that kind of lack of flexibility from IMO and STCW.
Thanks, Nick. One solution is also to have sufficient people on board of ships, of course. That'll help out
Absolutely.
With fatigue management as well. And Steen, I want to come back to you on similar topic. Earlier in your keynote, you mentioned that RightShip is going to set up a health score or a well-being score as part of the self-assessment. You explained it a little bit earlier on, but can you elaborate maybe a little bit more on some of the underlying factors that make up that score, and would fatigue be one of these?
I'm not sure I used the word score. If I did, that was unintentional, or maybe I was looking at the future, because the intention is not really to focus that effort on a score per se, as much as it is to focus the industry on getting involved and getting transparency around crew well-being. The starting point is essentially to articulate a code of conduct that both charterers and ship managers, DOC holders, can sign up to, and the demand on either of them will of course be different. And then relative to that code of conduct, there will be a self-assessment consisting of quite a few chapters. I think we are at chapter 8 or so, detailing many different elements of how you define crew well-being. And the intention is then to flesh out the outcome of that self-assessment onto the platform to provide transparency to the industry, where not initially in the form of a score, but in the form of a transparency whether that particular self-assessment reveals a DOC holder to have a basic compliance with the code of conduct, all the way up to the highest level of advanced compliance with that code of conduct. In doing that, of course, the DOC holder can benchmark against other DOC holders to see where is the industry going on these parameters. Each of the parameters will have specific value sets defined so that we as an industry can see how are we doing on the various elements that define the aggregate of a safety outcome for the seafarers, or well-being outcome, as it were, for the seafarers. So that's the intention with it. Will it then over time grow into a score? That depends on the industry. We are making our platform available for the industry to use, and again for users of the assets in terms of charterers to come together to have the same level of transparency and insight into the vessel as the owner and the ship manager would have, but who may not in the normal course of conversation or exchange reveal a status. That's what we are trying to make that's the whole idea really of a digital platform, to make that transparently available to everyone. And from there then decisions can be made. If a charterer believes that a certain level of excellence should be attained within specifically care for the crew, well then they will vote when they do their charters, and that can potentially become then a part of the definition of the vet, so that we could add that as another element to the vetting procedure, and if that's what the industry would like to see. I think it's really, really important to embrace that this is not an element of coming at it with a stick, but it's more coming at it with using transparency as the carrot that can allow the industry to learn from each other. There will be a tremendous amount of best practice put into this. And I appreciate that it might sound offensive when I say that we are hosting 57,000 vessels and we truly see the good, the bad, and the ugly out there. And I feel as an industry, we often come at this from the angle of how can we make good better. I think it's very useful, I'm sure, to have wearables that can show us the whereabouts of a seafarer on a vessel. I'm sure it will get us somewhere within that scope. But I'm also certain that there are a lot that would fall in the category of the ugly, that would need to take far more basic steps towards truly showing and living a care for the crew that will have a far greater impact on whether that crew gets home or not, safe, without injury, without accident. So perhaps technology can also be used in different ways to help that, if we all believe that the real mission we should be on here is to enhance that opportunity for the seafarer to have a safe working day and return home unharmed, then having policies. So this is what we are seeking to build into the crew well-being score, having a commitment towards whether you provide data and telephony access to a seafarer will have a direct impact on that person's well-being. I'm sure none of us that are land-based in our jobs would find it particularly cool if someone came and said we were disallowed to use our mobile phone for a week. Now that's the reality that many of the seafarers are living without a contact in this trying environment we're in today with their loved ones at home. That's not reasonable. So perhaps we could introduce specific definitions of how that should look for you to define that you have care for the crew. Perhaps we could introduce and learn from the best of the best how a mental health assessment should look like, and how we can benefit from the outcomes of those mental health assessments to ensure that we catch anything untoward before it turns into be a hazard for that crew or for the colleagues of that crew on board the vessel. So in that sense, I'm greatly enthusiastic about the availability of technology to help that journey. I just think we should aim really, really high, as opposed to the small elements that might be comforting but not make a huge difference in the industry.
I really do hope that it will work out the way you envisage it. I think it would be really good for the well-being of seafarers in general. We had one question that came in from the audience, which I wanted to ask Karsten for your brief thoughts before we move on to the next topic. Actually, it's a double question, and it's one of these questions we quite frequently see during this kind of debate. How can we standardize the crew training on board? With so many different ways of providing training to the crew, is there a way that we could standardize this training, or is that towards where we are moving now with the VR and the AR? And at the same time, and this is the age-old discussion between the airline industry and us, why is our equipment on board of ships not more standardized? And is there anything that technology can do to try and more standardize the equipment that we are using on board? Karsten.
That was a very simple double question. Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes, Karsten, we can.
Okay, because on my screen you're all frozen. So start with the latter, standardization of equipment. Well, that's a very, very long discussion. I would think to some extent that we will get a certain standardization simply due to the fact that there will be a kind of consolidation of equipment manufacturers. So we can see that 15 years ago there was more people, now there are lesser. And I think with the next generation of technology, I think there will also be less to choose from, at least from major components. So there we could talk about a certain standardization. The question on can we standardize training? Well, of course, to some extent we can, but I think also that's also a little bit depending on the segment you work in. I think what is it you're up against with whom, and how do you tackle the training? So I would say on let's say 10 years plus basis, I would not believe that you'll get to standardized training. That I think will stay as a dream, because we are still too far away from anything near the airline industry, where they have two manufacturers of two standard pieces of equipment. If we add on the whole localization of component sourcing from China to Korea to Japan to Europe in some cases, I think it's a pretty long drive to get there. But on the major components, I think there will be some training. I'm less optimistic.
Thank you, Karsten. I know it was easy to ask of me, but I know it's a difficult answer to provide. Before we move on to the smart data analytics, I would like to put up a poll for our audience that they can have a look at and answer while we go through the next question. And that's on, on what is that? To give us your thoughts on what the technology providers should focus on next in order to improve the safety on board of ships. So I will let the audience think on that, but then I want to talk for a short bit about the data analytics. And this has been mentioned, and I know, Steen, in your presentation and throughout your various answers, you've touched upon all these different ways that technology or analytics can be used in order to improve. But I want to go to Øyvind on this first. And Øyvind, from your perspective, what's the next step now? We are doing all these different things with data. Where do we need to go with analytical process?
Yeah, I would like to come back to Karsten's comments first, because the question about standardizing training, I think one of the main benefits we'll see from the next generation of technology is that will allow for not standardization of training, but for specific training for each particular vessel. And according to our research, that way can have a real benefit that people learn what are the right responses for their job on board that particular vessel with those particular systems. And that's something that's much easier done with what technology we see coming in future rather than what we have seen so far. But then looking at the different trends on this data analytics, you have the development of digital twins on one hand, you have the introduction of machine learning or the widespread use of machine learning. And thirdly, this push towards autonomous ships. And the common denominator, of course, are data and the possibilities we now have for extensive data harvesting and analysis. Now, each of these are not in their own sense particularly new. Digital twins is nothing new. It's a data representation of ship with all its different systems, integrating both classical models and live data. What is new is that we now have more computing power, better possibilities for connecting models, better measurements data, and we can create models that actually represent a live ship. Machine learning, same, is not its old news. Again, it's the access to data and the computing power that is really starting to make a difference. And then there's push towards autonomous ships. To me, autonomy is not a goal in itself. Well, developing the technology is a goal. Opening those possibilities is a goal. But the fundamental aim is to develop efficient transport systems. And then autonomy is, or maybe one very important tool in that toolbox. So where I see the real difference coming in principle is how accessible data is becoming. Instead of ship systems only being developed by the big guys, it's becoming increasingly possible for startups and smaller companies to get access to data and create systems that really make an impact. So to me, the next step in this big data analytical evolution is this new ecosystem of applications. In a way, you may be seeing an app store or Google Play for shipping. So a much bigger variety and let's say a new influx of brain power coming from the availability of data and the possibility to use new computer systems. But then I'd like to raise one concern as well. For both digital twins and for autonomous systems, there's a flip side that's often overlooked. Perhaps it's not cool enough, I don't know. And that's the importance of the classical physical models that has to be at the base of it all. I mean, from the oil and gas industry, machine learning has been tested and tried for quite a while. And they were moving away from systems that are based on clean sheets, just the system learning based on data. What's seen now is to create real digital twins, autonomous systems, and data analytics, especially related to safety at sea. It is important to have a solid basis on classical ship physics, classical environmental behavioral science, classical tank model tests, and then you can use machine learning to continuously update and improve predictions, support operational decisions, support commercial decisions. And in all this discussion of how great technology is and how wonderful it is to move forward, I mean, the good examples don't need to be high-flying or particularly advanced. Just a comparison between real fuel consumption and a theoretical optimal fuel consumption would clearly provide a lot of value. Weather routing and other relevant examples with limited power, this would be increasingly important to avoid critical situations. And then if you start considering future propulsion solutions, such as wind-assisted propulsion, then weather routing would clearly be essential. But even more dependent on having accurate physics at the base. So I would say that we have a real interesting future coming where these classical aspects of ship operation, ship design, and the new digital solutions will merge. And then where we will see hopefully see a new ecosystem of technology providers that are emerging to support our businesses.
Thank you, Øyvind. That's fascinating. I'm going to raise 2 points on this because we don't have sufficient time to go through it in more detail. But with the implementation of more data on board and the analytics that is being done, we do need to be careful that we are not getting into a big brother type of situation. That's something to be careful about on board of ships. I know that there are certain seafarers who are concerned about that. That's one point I wanted to raise. And the second point I wanted to raise on this, which sadly we won't have time to discuss, in order for data analytics to work, we really need to have a lot more companies that are willing and actually doing the sharing of data. At the moment, we still see too many companies that analyze their own data, but that are not willing to actually share it with others and analyze it on a bigger scale. I think that's something that needs to change. We have 8 minutes left. A big red clock is telling me here. And I want to move into the last part. And could we bring up the results of the poll that we just asked everyone? And can I then ask my various panelists to give your opinion on what we are seeing here? The majority of people are choosing providing a meaningful analysis, not an abundance of data. That ties along nicely with what we said. And as the second point, a simplified process for the entire supply chain. Nick, can I start with you? Your brief thoughts on this and a closing thought for the discussion that we've had.
Yeah, sure. So I think it all actually comes back to culture. This first, being able to provide meaningful analysis and not just a huge amount of data. It's certainly a growing issue, and I think that's something where what you need to do is create a culture that brings everyone together around these data sets to look at where efficiencies could be found, where they could tie back to real sort of meaningful change that can happen on board the vessel. That requires an investment in skill. It requires an upskilling, not just those who sit in a data science lab somewhere in your operation, but also ops people throughout the organization, seafarers who are on the ships. It is an entirely new way of kind of looking at these issues that we need to embrace. And I think building on that to sort of come back to closing thoughts, and also just sort of tying in your point about Big Brother, Yves. The way I view technology is that it's an amplifier. It allows you to do things faster, cheaper, and at a bigger scale, but it's completely neutral. So no technology is inherently bad or good. It's about how it's used, and it will just amplify the outcome. So, for example, nuclear technology can either be used to build homes or it can be used to make bombs. Same with social media. It can be used to connect families together, or it can be used to subvert democratic elections. And if we bring this concept back to ships and the human element, it all comes down to trust and culture. So if you're operating in a low trust environment where safety culture is really poor, and there's a high blame culture and people cover things up, adding technology is just going to amplify that poor safety culture, and it's going to amplify the feeling that Big Brother is watching, and it's going to amplify all of the issues that we've talked about that come from trust. And by contrast, if you're already operating in a high trust environment where the safety culture is strong, Oyvind mentioned about sort of recording high frequencies, low impact incidents and accidents, things like near misses, making sure they go back into some kind of data analysis and then come back to action on the ship. You can throw all the technology you want at that, but if you don't have the crew actually trusting that process, it's not going to happen. So if you've got a strong safety culture, technology will amplify it, and it will make it easier for seafarers and management teams to work together, and it will actually increase trust and transparency. So I think the first thing to concentrate as we come away from this is to focus on improving trust, improving the culture across the fleet management organization and also on board the ships themselves, and then throw the technology on top. And I think that is a route to kind of continuous improvement when it comes to safety. If that trust doesn't exist, then all you're going to do is create bigger problems for yourselves down the line.
Thank you, Nick. Karsten, can we come to you for your closing thoughts?
Yes, you can, Yves, and I would say in general I'm optimistic. I think I think on technology, and the whole data provision that's going to develop, and I think it's going to develop fast. I think we're going to get tools at our hands we have not had before. It's going to come. I think the whole connectivity, and which we're also touching upon. Just imagine what happens at the time when the vessels are connected constantly online. We can teams with them without any limitations and so on and so forth. When that happens, I think that's going to open for new ways of doing things. I'm also sure we're going to get to reduce emissions, which is kind of the overarching big target for everyone. We will get there. I think the manhood will find ways, and I'm with Nick 100% on the people side. Where I'm still optimistic is in the sense that we actually know what to do. We know all the things in the team. The big question is, how do we implement it? How do we actually get it? How do we get the good solid safety culture based on trust among team members on the ship or between ship and shore? How do we actually do this? But it's not that we cannot do it, because we have done it, but we just need to implement it at a much wider scale. So that'll be my final conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Karsten. Oyvind, can we come to you for your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you for a very good discourse. And the recommendations from let's say, my research perspective are actually quite simple. To get from this abundance of data to analysis that has a real impact for business. And if you can prove that data improves business, then we have a case that's just going to escalate. And then what I see as a interesting development in future is that this development lets us make models that are specific for each ship, which will then improve the crew training and safety efficiency. So specific models rather than the generic we are seeing today. And that analytics will be able to drill down to have ship-specific models rather than generic models at the base. And then I see, like Karsten, I see a really interesting future where you have, let's say, the classical part of the operation, which will never change, merging with the new digital developments that are accelerating fantastically all around us. And we will see a new ecosystem of companies technology providers, crew training providers that will be emerging that will really make a difference for our complete operation.
Thank you, Øyvind. Steen, can we have your thoughts?
Has to be fast. I can see 108, it says in red.
That's why I came last to you.
Number one, we talked about the human element. And I'm quite convinced that we have talked a lot and we have done less. I've been in this industry for 34 years. This year was the first time I met the first PhD in the human element with a ship owner. First time. I'm sure I don't meet everybody here in the industry, but that was quite telling. And this lady had some very, very different approaches to how they, in that ship owner, were focusing on safety for the seafarer. So I can only encourage all of us to embrace that wholeheartedly. I think there's a lot to be done, a lot to be harvested that everyone will benefit from. Obviously, as RightShip, we are a digital platform, so we are a great believer in technology. We can also see that there is challenging times, sometimes when there is a perception that the data is not safe to be shared. We often come back to that element. If I part ways with my data, am I exposing myself legally or in other ways? And I'm also certain we've seen an incredible amount of good examples how that can be overcome. Neutralizing the data, having good contracting structures in place that can allow that transportation of data in and out of the ecosystem. So again, an area I think I would encourage, don't be afraid, find elements, find tools that allow you to share. And obviously, we'd like to be part of that journey in helping the industry to fulfill its mission to have a safer working environment for the seafarers.
Thank you, Steen. I got one message here, and we would like to close with a question from our live audience here, which is really interesting. Captain Kunal, would you like?
Thank you, Yves, and thank you to the moderator and the panelists. It's more of a comment rather than question arising from what Nick mentioned earlier. The 4 times, which Yves, you also noted that the amount of investment the industry is willing to do for vessel assets versus people. And my comment is not more on the training part, but rather well-being part, because training has been there for a very long time. You can add in all the bells and whistles with all the VR and AR. If the well-being of the individual is not taken care of, you can keep going 30 years down the line. I guarantee you, as an investigator, we'll still be talking about the same issues come what may. So it all boils down to the well-being of the individual. Training and all that can add on to the element, but I think we need to focus on the well-being. So that's more of a comment, but thank you to the panelists for bringing that topic up. Thank you.
Thank you, Kunal. And I think this goes back very much towards what Karsten was saying earlier on. If we cannot even do our crew change properly, why are we bothered about trying to invent new technology? So I think really we do need to focus a lot, as you say, on the well-being, on our human element, on our seafarers on board. And with that, I very much would like to thank all of my panelists for giving up their time, for sharing their valuable information with the audience. I would like to thank MPA for organizing this event and allowing us to come and share our opinions. And very much thanks to you, the audience, for dialing in and for asking your questions. I know you've asked me a lot more questions. I wasn't able to get through all of them, but I hope you found this an interesting discussion. Fiona, thank you very much.
Thank you, Captain Eve, and our esteemed panelists for your insights and a thought-provoking discussion. Last but not least, we will be announcing the winners of the MPA International Safety at Sea Awards. While we are unable to present the certificates in person this year, the organizing committee has prepared this video to pay tributes to our winners. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy. The MPA International Safety at Sea Awards recognize and celebrate outstanding contributions at both the corporate and individual levels. And nominations are reviewed by the National Maritime Safety at Sea Council. Our award recipients this year have contributed to safety at sea in two areas: search and rescue efforts, as well as innovation in technology, systems, and training in the open category. Before we announce the winners, let us hear from Ms. Kwa Lei Hun, Chief Executive of the Maritime and Ports Authority of Singapore, and Mr. Ishak Ismail, Chairman of the National Maritime Safety at Sea Council.
Dear friends and partners of Maritime Singapore, this year we have had a few sea incidents, including vessels grounding and catching on fires. We cannot reinforce enough the importance of safety at sea, for without crew and without ships, the global supply chain will be affected. Essential goods will not be transported to different countries. Against such challenging times, we must continue to reinforce the key message of safety at sea. All of us play a part, and this year, MPA is glad to once again recognize and celebrate the efforts of those who have made outstanding contributions to safety. Congratulations to all the winners. Thank you for saving lives and making the seas safer, and for your utmost dedication to keep international trade uninterrupted for all of us. We salute your sacrifice. Thank you.
Dear seafarers and all who are in the maritime industry, safety at sea is important to all of us, and thus every year we recognize the efforts of many who go beyond the normal, particularly in the area of rescue at sea. And the stories for this year's nominations are very heartwarming and inspiring. One particular story left a deep impression on me. During a search and rescue effort in a Category 4 storm, when the rescuers were unable to persuade the survivors to release their grip from their upturned pleasure craft, a bosun had jumped into the waters at 2.5 meter swell seas towards the survivors to create the link between the survivors and the rescue boat. What made him take such personal risks to save the children and adults of the capsized pleasure craft, as they did not have life jackets on and would have lost their lives in such dangerous conditions at sea? So every year, we recognize and celebrate such acts of safety and bravery through the MPA International Safety at Sea Awards. We also take the chance to recognize companies that develop innovative solutions to enhance safety at sea. On behalf of the National Maritime Safety at Sea Council, we want to thank all seafarers for keeping our seas safe, and our utmost congratulations to all winners.
We would like to start by recognizing outstanding search and rescue efforts in 2020. And these are our awardees for successful search and rescue operations carried out by Singapore-flagged vessels, Singapore companies, or vessels in Singapore's search and rescue region last year. Anglo-Eastern Ship Management Singapore Private Limited, ASP Ships Group and Rio Tinto, CMA CGM International Shipping Company Private Limited, Executive Ship Management Private Limited, Tata NYK Shipping Private Limited, and Fleet Ship Management Private Limited, Tai Chong Cheng Steamship Company, Shanghai Limited, Thong Group, Union Marine Management Services Private Limited, Congratulations to our 8 awardees. Next, we have our open category, which recognizes innovations in technology, systems, training, or substantive contributions to safety of operations. We have 2 winners this year. Congratulations to Singtel Satellite for winning the award for its work on the Trustwave Security Awareness Education Program. The course is aligned with BIMCO's guidelines on cybersecurity on board ships And this comprehensive training program allows crew to complete the course while on board, with their progress being monitored by those on shore.
Thank you, MPA and the National Maritime Safety at Sea Council for this award. It's my honor to receive this on behalf of Singtel. This award has given us even greater motivation to continue to innovate and to come up with solutions and services that can help to contribute towards the raising of the cybersecurity awareness for crew members at sea. And this in turn will greatly improve the cyber protection of the ships as well as those of the shipping companies. The digital protection of the ships is today as important as the physical protection of the ships. We are certainly committed to continue to contribute towards the development and growth of the maritime industry through even more maritime innovations to improve ship operations, crew safety, and the crew welfare in the coming months. Thank you.
This year, we're also pleased to present the award in the open category to TK Marine Singapore Private Limited for its fatigue risk management efforts on board its entire fleet using the innovative Rest Manager software. This application was co-created with Sea Solutions, and it utilizes face recognition technology and captures live data to proactively manage rest hours and non-compliance avoidance. Congratulations, TK Marine Singapore Private Limited.
It is indeed an honor and privilege to be the proud recipient of the International Safety at Sea Award for Innovation in Technology and Systems. At TK, we live by our values, where safety and innovation stand out. The Rest Manager solution, with first of its kind face recognition technology, is designed towards proactive improvement of overall rest hour management and thus contributing to safety on board. It is with thanks that I received this award on behalf of my family at TK, and we will continue to innovate towards a safer environment for the future of shipping. Once again, thank you.
This year, the National Maritime Safety at Sea Council is also presenting letters of commendation to recognize safety-related endeavors by both companies and individuals. We're pleased to congratulate the following recipients: Everguest Ship Management Private Limited and Executive Offshore Private Limited for their efforts at a corporate level to enhance safety at sea. Pacific International Lines Private Limited for the search and rescue effort that the master and crew of MV Kotaria initiated. Captain Pankaj Aditya, whose leadership in rallying the crew to fight the 25-meter-high fire on board the ship helped to avert a bigger crisis. Mr. Fontella Arc Battaglia, the boatswain who jumped into 2.5-meter swell seas to rescue the children and adults from a capsized pleasure craft. And last but not least, Mr. Wade Pierce, for his efforts to create greater awareness about safety at sea for sea sports users. Congratulations to all our winners, and thank you for your outstanding contributions towards safety at sea. We also want to take this opportunity to salute our frontline officers, the men and women from multiple agencies who have tirelessly responded to incidents at sea 24/7, 365 days a year. Thank you all for your efforts and dedication to making our seas safer for all. And that concludes the opening session of the International Safety at Sea Week. Join us tomorrow as our keynote speakers and panelists focus on the safer carriage of goods. What more must be done for Plenary 1 at 2:30 p.m. Singapore time, and rethinking crew training in a VUCA world for Plenary 2 happening at 5 p.m. Singapore time. We would also like to get your views on today's session. We hope that you can take a few minutes to complete a feedback form, which will pop up later when you exit. And last but not least, You can also take part in our quiz at the end of each session to win an Amazon gift voucher worth 50 Singapore dollars. To qualify, just scan the QR code or click on the link posted in the chat window. Answer all the questions correctly and you could be one of the lucky winners randomly drawn per session. All the best and good luck. On that note, we would like to thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our 2 plenary sessions tomorrow. Take care and goodbye.